Dr. Angela Martinez walked quickly down the busy street in Washington, D.C. The morning sun was bright and warm on her face as she checked her watch again. She was running late for one of the most important meetings of her career. Today, she would speak to Congress about military spending and defense programs that could affect the whole country. Angela carried a heavy black briefcase in her right hand. Inside were dozens of classified documents, reports, and her prepared speech. She had worked on this presentation for weeks. Every number had to be perfect. Every fact had to be correct. The Pentagon had trusted her with this responsibility, and she would not let them down. As she walked, Angela thought about how far she had come in life. Growing up in Detroit, she never imagined she would one day work for the Pentagon. Her family did not have much money. Her mother worked 2 jobs just to pay the bills. Her father had left when she was only 8 years old. But Angela was smart and determined. She studied hard in school even when other kids made fun of her for always reading books. In high school, Angela worked at a grocery store after classes to help her mother with expenses. She would come home tired, but still spend hours doing homework. Her teachers noticed how bright she was and encouraged her to apply for college scholarships. Angela applied to dozens of schools and was accepted to several with full scholarships. College was not easy for Angela. She was often the only black student in her classes. Some professors seemed surprised when she answered questions correctly, or got high grades on tests. But Angela never gave up. She studied international relations and military history. She learned about different countries and their defense systems. She read about wars and peace treaties. She wanted to understand how nations protect themselves and their people. After graduating with top honors, Angela continued her education. She earned a master's degree and then a doctorate in international relations from Georgetown University. This was one of the best schools in the country. Her dissertation was about military spending in developing countries. Professors at Georgetown were impressed by her research and writing skills. Getting a job at the Pentagon was like a dream come true for Angela. The Pentagon is the headquarters of the United States military. It is where the most important defense decisions are made. Angela started as a junior analyst, but her bosses quickly recognized her talents. She was promoted several times over the years. Now she was a senior analyst with top-secret security clearance. Working at the Pentagon meant Angela had access to classified information that most people could never see. She knew about military operations around the world. She understood the costs of different defense programs. She helped military leaders make decisions about how to spend billions of dollars. Her work helped keep America safe. But Angela's job was not without challenges. Even with all her education and experience, some people still questioned whether she belonged at the Pentagon. In meetings, she sometimes noticed colleagues looking at her with surprise when she spoke about complex military issues. A few times, new employees had mistaken her for support staff instead of a senior analyst. These experiences frustrated Angela, but she never let them show. She maintained her professionalism at all times. She dressed carefully for work, always, wearing business suits and carrying herself with confidence. She spoke clearly and backed up her opinions with facts and data. Over time, most of her colleagues came to respect her expertise and judgment. Angela specialized in budget analysis for overseas military operations. This meant she studied how much money the military spent on bases, equipment, and personnel in foreign countries. She had to understand not just the costs, but also the strategic importance of these investments. Her reports helped Congress decide how much money to approve for defense spending each year. Today's congressional hearing was especially important. The military wanted to expand several overseas programs, but some members of Congress were concerned about the costs. Angela's job was to present the facts clearly and help lawmakers understand why these programs were necessary for national security. As she approached the federal courthouse where the hearing would take place, Angela felt a mix of nervousness and excitement. She had testified before Congress several times before, but it never got easier. She knew that reporters would be there. Her words might be quoted in newspapers and on television. Military leaders and government officials would be watching to see how she performed. The courthouse was an impressive building, with tall columns and wide steps leading to the entrance. Angela had been there many times before for various government meetings. She knew the security procedures and had all the proper identification. Her Pentagon ID card was in her wallet along with her driver's license and congressional hearing pass. Angela climbed the steps slowly, organizing her thoughts for the presentation ahead. She thought about the key points she needed to make. The military programs she would discuss were not just about spending money. They were about protecting American soldiers and advancing national security interests. She had statistics showing how these programs had prevented conflicts and saved lives in the past. Inside her briefcase were charts and graphs that would help explain complex budget information to the congressional panel. She had copies of her prepared remarks, but she also knew the material well enough to speak without notes if necessary. Angela believed that being thoroughly prepared was the key to success in any important meeting. As she reached the top of the courthouse steps, Angela saw other government officials and military personnel also arriving for the hearing. Some she recognized from previous meetings at the Pentagon. Others were new faces, probably staff members for the congressional representatives who would be asking questions today. Angela took a deep breath and straightened her shoulders. She was ready for this moment. All her years of education, training, and experience had prepared her for days like this. She represented not just herself, but the entire defense analysis team at the Pentagon. She was proud of the work she had done and confident in the recommendations she would present. The morning air was crisp and clean as Angela approached the courthouse entrance. She could see security guards and metal detectors just inside the doors. This was standard procedure for all federal buildings. Angela had her identification ready and expected to pass through security quickly so she could review her notes one more time before the hearing began. She had no idea that the next few minutes would change everything. Angela walked toward the courthouse doors with confidence, completely unaware that she was about to face a situation that would test not just her professionalism, but her dignity and composure in ways she had never imagined possible. Officer Bradley Thompson stood near the courthouse entrance watching people come and go. He had been working courthouse security for 3 years now and thought he knew how to spot trouble. Thompson was a tall man with a thick mustache and sharp eyes that seemed to judge everyone who walked past him. He took pride in what he called his ability to read people, though others might have called it something else entirely. Thompson had grown up in a small town outside Washington, D.C., where most people looked like him and shared similar backgrounds. When he moved to the city for work, he found himself uncomfortable with the diversity he encountered daily. Rather than trying to understand different people and cultures, Thompson had developed a habit of making quick judgments based on appearances and his own limited experiences. The courthouse assignment was supposed to be an easy job. Thompson was responsible for monitoring the security checkpoint and helping other officers when needed. Most days were routine with lawyers, government workers, and citizens coming for various legal matters. But Thompson had a way of making simple situations complicated, especially when he encountered people who did not fit his narrow idea of who belonged in important government buildings. On this particular morning, Thompson was feeling especially alert. There had been recent security briefings about maintaining vigilance at federal facilities. Thompson interpreted these briefings in his own way, focusing more on his personal suspicions than actual security protocols. He had already stopped 3 people that morning, questioning their business at the courthouse even though they all had proper identification and legitimate reasons for being there. Thompson noticed patterns that existed mostly in his own mind. He paid extra attention to certain people while barely glancing at others. His supervisors had spoken to him before about following proper procedures rather than his gut feelings, but Thompson believed his instincts were better than any training manual. He saw himself as the first line of defense against people who might not belong in such an important building. The federal courthouse handled many different types of cases and meetings. Congressional hearings were held there regularly, bringing together politicians, military officials, and expert witnesses. Thompson had worked security for dozens of these events, but he still approached each one with the same suspicious attitude. He rarely bothered to learn about who was expected to attend or what the meetings were about. As the morning progressed, Thompson watched a steady stream of people entering the building. Most were dressed professionally in business suits and carried briefcases or folders. Some he recognized as regular courthouse staff or frequent visitors. Others were clearly lawyers based on their formal attire and confident manner. A few were obviously military personnel in uniform or civilian clothes, but with military bearing. Thompson had developed his own unofficial system for deciding who deserved extra scrutiny. People wearing expensive clothes sometimes made him suspicious, especially if they were young or belonged to minority groups. In his mind, certain people should not be able to afford nice things or hold important positions. This thinking revealed more about Thompson's own insecurities and prejudices than any real security concerns. The officer spent much of his time watching people rather than actually checking credentials properly. He would glance at identification cards without really examining them carefully. He rarely verified names against visitor lists or called to confirm appointments. Instead, Thompson relied on his first impressions and personal biases to decide who might be causing trouble. Thompson's approach to security often created unnecessary delays and confrontations. He had been reported to supervisors several times by people who felt they had been treated unfairly. Each time, Thompson defended his actions by claiming he was just being thorough. He never seemed to understand that being thorough meant following proper procedures, not harassing people based on personal prejudices. Earlier that week, Thompson had attended a brief training session about recognizing different types of government identification. The instructor had shown examples of Pentagon ID cards, congressional passes, and other official documents. But Thompson had not paid close attention during the training. He spent most of the session thinking about other things and assumed he already knew everything he needed to know about security. The morning sun streamed through the large windows near the courthouse entrance, casting long shadows across the floor where Thompson stood. He adjusted his uniform and checked his radio, trying to look official and important. Thompson enjoyed the feeling of authority that came with his position, even though he often misused that authority in ways that created problems rather than solving them. As Thompson scanned the area, he noticed more people arriving for what seemed to be an important meeting. Several men in military uniforms had already passed through security. A few people in expensive business suits had also entered, without any issues. Thompson began to feel like he needed to prove his worth by finding someone who did not belong. The officer's radio crackled with routine communications from other security personnel throughout the building. Everything seemed normal and quiet, which somehow made Thompson more restless. He preferred busy days when he felt more important and needed. On quiet days like this, he sometimes created his own excitement by being overly suspicious of perfectly innocent people. Thompson's supervisor, Maria Rodriguez, was working at the main security desk inside the building. She had noticed Thompson's tendency to cause unnecessary problems and had spoken to him about it several times. Rodriguez was a professional security officer with many years of experience. She understood the difference between being appropriately cautious and being prejudiced against certain types of people. The courthouse had clear procedures for handling security situations. All officers were trained to check identification politely and efficiently. They were supposed to verify visitor appointments when necessary and treat everyone with respect, regardless of their appearance or background. These procedures existed to ensure both security and fairness for all people entering the building. Thompson knew these procedures but often ignored them when they conflicted with his personal opinions. He had never been formally disciplined because his supervisors hoped he would improve with time and additional training. They were beginning to realize that Thompson's problems went deeper than simple inexperience or poor training. As the morning continued, Thompson positioned himself where he could observe everyone entering the courthouse. He watched faces and clothing, making mental notes about people who caught his attention for various reasons. Most of his observations were based on stereotypes and assumptions rather than any actual security training or legitimate concerns. The federal building was busy with people going about their normal business. Lawyers met with clients, government officials attended meetings, and citizens came to handle legal matters. For everyone except Thompson, it was shaping up to be a routine day at one of the most important courthouses in the country. Thompson had no idea that his next encounter would expose his prejudices in front of dozens of witnesses and create consequences that would follow him for the rest of his career. He continued to stand guard, convinced that he was protecting the courthouse. from people who did not belong there, completely unaware that his own behavior was about to become the real security problem. Angela walked through the courthouse doors with confidence, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor. She had been through this building's security many times before and expected nothing unusual. The metal detector beeped softly as people passed through, and security guards checked bags and briefcases in their normal routine. Angela placed her briefcase on the conveyor belt and stepped through the scanner without any problems. Officer Thompson watched Angela from the moment she entered the building. Something about her immediately caught his attention in all the wrong ways. He saw a well-dressed black woman carrying an expensive briefcase and walking with the kind of confidence that made him uncomfortable. In Thompson's narrow worldview, she did not fit his idea of who should be entering such an important federal building with such authority. As Angela retrieved her briefcase from the security belt, Thompson stepped forward. His voice was stern and demanding when he spoke to her, quite different from the polite tone he had used with other visitors that morning. He asked to see her identification, but his manner suggested he had already decided something was wrong, before even looking at her documents. Angela was surprised by Thompson's harsh tone but remained professional. She had encountered situations like this before in her career, and knew the best approach was to stay calm and cooperative. She reached into her wallet and pulled out her Pentagon identification card along with her driver's license. These were official government documents that clearly showed her high-level security clearance and position as a senior defense analyst. Thompson barely glanced at Angela's identification cards before declaring that something seemed suspicious about them. He held the Pentagon ID up to the light and examined it with exaggerated suspicion, as if he were some kind of expert in detecting fake documents. The truth was that Thompson had never seen many Pentagon ID cards and did not really know what to look for to verify their authenticity. Other people in the security area began to notice the commotion. Several lawyers and government workers slowed down to watch what was happening. Some pulled out their phones, sensing that they might be witnessing something significant. Angela felt embarrassed as more people turned to stare at her, but she maintained her composure and tried to explain her situation clearly. Angela told Thompson that she was scheduled to testify before a congressional committee in just 20 minutes. She explained that she was a Pentagon analyst and had been called to speak about military budget issues. Her voice remained calm and professional, but inside she felt the familiar frustration of having to prove her legitimacy to someone who should have simply checked her credentials and allowed her to pass. Thompson was not interested in Angela's explanations. He seemed to have made up his mind that she was trying to gain unauthorized access to the building. He spoke to her in a condescending way, asking who had given her permission to enter and questioning whether her documents were real. His behavior was completely inappropriate and went against all the training he had received about proper security procedures. The situation grew more tense as Thompson continued to question Angela's right to be in the building. He demanded to know exactly what she planned to do and who she was supposed to meet. Angela patiently explained again about the congressional hearing, but Thompson acted as if her story was obviously false. He seemed convinced that no one like her could possibly have legitimate business at such an important government proceeding. Angela offered to show Thompson her official congressional summons and her prepared testimony documents. These papers clearly identified her as Dr. Angela Martinez and described her role as an expert witness on defense spending issues. But Thompson waved away her offers to provide additional proof, claiming that anyone could fake such documents. More security personnel began to notice the disturbance Thompson was creating. Maria Rodriguez, the senior security supervisor, was busy with other duties but could hear raised voices from the entrance area. She made a mental note to check on the situation if it continued much longer. Rodriguez had dealt with Thompson's problematic behavior before and was growing tired of the complaints about his unprofessional conduct. Angela remained patient, even as Thompson's behavior became more unreasonable. She understood that losing her temper would only make the situation worse and could potentially affect her upcoming testimony. But inside she felt the weight of years of similar encounters where her qualifications and achievements had been questioned simply because of her race. The crowd of onlookers continued to grow as Thompson's voice became louder and more aggressive. Several people began recording the interaction with their phones, sensing that they were witnessing an injustice unfold. Angela was aware of the attention, but tried to focus on resolving the situation quickly so she could get to her important meeting. Thompson seemed to be enjoying the power he felt he held over Angela. He had attracted attention from other people in the building and felt important as he questioned this well-dressed woman who clearly thought she belonged in places where he believed she did not. His behavior revealed his own insecurities and prejudices more than any legitimate security concerns. Angela checked her watch and realized that her testimony was supposed to begin in just 15 minutes. She felt a growing sense of urgency as Thompson continued to delay her entry into the building. The Congressional Committee was expecting her presentation on critical defense budget issues, and her absence could affect important funding decisions for military programs. The tension in the security area was becoming obvious to everyone present. Other visitors whispered among themselves about what they were witnessing. Some shook their heads in disapproval at Thompson's behavior, while others seemed uncomfortable with the entire situation. The atmosphere had changed from routine morning business to something much more serious and problematic. Thompson's radio crackled with routine communications, but he ignored the calls from his supervisors. He was completely focused on his confrontation with Angela, convinced that he was doing important security work by preventing her from entering the building. He had no understanding of how his actions were actually creating a security problem rather than solving one. Angela tried once more to reason with Thompson, explaining that the Congressional Committee was waiting for her testimony and that she had all the proper authorization to be in the building. She spoke clearly and calmly, using the same professional tone she employed when briefing military generals and government officials. But Thompson seemed determined not to listen to anything she said. The standoff continued as Thompson insisted that Angela's credentials were suspicious and that she needed to provide more proof of her identity and purpose. Angela realized that no amount of documentation would satisfy him, because his objections were not really based on security concerns. She began to understand that she was dealing with something much more troubling than a simple misunderstanding about proper procedures. As the confrontation dragged on, Angela felt her professional composure beginning to strain. She had dealt with discrimination throughout her career, but this public humiliation in front of dozens of witnesses was particularly difficult to endure. She knew that her reaction to this situation could affect not just her own reputation, but also how other people viewed her capabilities as a Pentagon analyst and expert witness. Thompson's demands became more unreasonable as the minutes passed. He was now insisting that Angela completely empty her briefcase to prove she was not carrying anything dangerous or suspicious. This request went far beyond normal security procedures and was clearly motivated by his personal prejudices rather than any legitimate safety concerns. Angela knew that her briefcase contained classified government documents that should not be exposed in a public area. Angela tried to explain to Thompson that her briefcase contained sensitive materials that required special handling. She told him that some of the documents were classified and could not be displayed in front of unauthorized personnel, but Thompson dismissed her concerns and accused her of making excuses to avoid inspection. He claimed that if she had nothing to hide, she should have no problem showing him everything in her possession. The crowd of witnesses continued to grow as Thompson's voice became louder and more confrontational. Several people were now openly filming the encounter with their smartphones. Angela was painfully aware that this humiliating scene was being recorded and might end up on social media or news websites. She worried about how this incident might affect her professional reputation and her ability to do her job effectively. Thompson stepped closer to Angela and spoke in a threatening tone. He told her that she could either cooperate with his demands or be escorted from the building by security. Angela realized that she had little choice but to comply if she wanted any chance of making it to her congressional testimony. With great reluctance, she agreed to open her briefcase, hoping that Thompson would quickly see her official documents and allow her to proceed. Angela carefully opened her briefcase on a nearby table, trying to keep the most sensitive documents away from the curious onlookers. But Thompson was not satisfied with a careful inspection. He demanded that she remove everything completely so he could examine each item individually. Angela's hands began to shake slightly as she tried to maintain her composure while dealing with this unreasonable and humiliating treatment. As Angela lifted a stack of documents from her briefcase, Thompson suddenly grabbed her arm and told her to move faster. The unexpected physical contact startled Angela and caused her to lose her grip on the papers. Several important documents scattered across the floor of the courthouse entrance, landing in full view of the many witnesses who had gathered to watch the confrontation. Among the papers that fell were documents clearly marked with Pentagon seals and classification stamps. One folder was labeled Top Secret in large red letters. Another document was a letter from the Secretary of Defense commending Angela's recent work on strategic military partnerships. Her prepared congressional testimony also scattered across the floor, along with charts and graphs showing sensitive budget information for overseas military operations. The sight of classified government documents scattered across the courthouse floor caused an immediate stir among the onlookers. Several people gasped and pointed at the official seals and classification markings. It became instantly clear to everyone present that Angela was exactly who she claimed to be, and that Thompson had created a serious security breach by forcing her to expose sensitive materials in a public area. Thompson stared at the documents, on the floor with a look of shock and confusion. He had expected to find fake papers or evidence that Angela was lying about her identity. Instead, he was looking at obviously authentic government documents that proved she held a high-level position in the Pentagon. The classification stamps and official seals were impossible to fake, and clearly demonstrated Angela's legitimate authority and security clearance. Angela quickly knelt down to gather her scattered documents, her professional training taking over as she tried to minimize the security exposure. She carefully collected each paper while shielding the classified information from the cameras and curious eyes around her. Years of handling sensitive materials had taught her the proper procedures for dealing with such situations, even under stress. The crowd of witnesses began to murmur among themselves as they realized what had just happened. It was obvious to everyone that Thompson had seriously misjudged the situation and had treated a high-ranking government official with completely inappropriate suspicion and disrespect. Several people shook their heads in disgust at Thompson's behavior, while others continued filming to document the incident. Maria Rodriguez, the senior security supervisor, heard the commotion and quickly walked over to investigate. As an experienced security professional, she immediately recognized the significance of what she was seeing. Rodriguez had worked federal security for over 15 years and knew authentic Pentagon classifications when she saw them. She realized that Thompson had not only violated proper procedures, but had also created a potential national security incident. Rodriguez quickly assessed the situation and took control. She ordered Thompson to step back and stop interfering with Angela's efforts to secure the classified documents. Rodriguez then called for additional security personnel to help establish a perimeter and ensure that no unauthorized individuals could photograph or examine the sensitive materials that had been exposed. Angela finally managed to collect all of her scattered documents and secure them back in her briefcase. But the damage had already been done. Classified information had been exposed in a public area, creating a security breach that would need to be reported through official channels. Angela knew that this incident would trigger investigations and paperwork that could take weeks to resolve. Thompson stood frozen as he watched the scene unfold around him. He was beginning to understand that he had made a terrible mistake, but he was not yet ready to admit his error. Instead, he tried to justify his actions by claiming that he was just following security procedures. But his explanations sounded hollow and unconvincing to everyone who had witnessed his unprofessional behavior. Rodriguez immediately began damage control procedures. She contacted her supervisors to report the classification breach and requested guidance on how to proceed. She also made sure that Angela had recovered all of her documents and asked if any information had been compromised. Rodriguez's professional handling of the crisis stood in sharp contrast to Thompson's reckless behavior. Angela checked her watch and realized that her congressional testimony was supposed to begin in just 5 minutes. The incident had delayed her entry into the building and disrupted her preparation time. She felt frustrated and angry about the unnecessary complications Thompson had created. but she tried to focus on fulfilling her professional responsibilities, despite the difficult circumstances. The witnesses who had filmed the incident began sharing their videos on social media, adding comments about the unfair treatment they had observed. Within minutes, clips of the confrontation were beginning to spread online, drawing attention from people who were outraged by Thompson's obvious bias and unprofessional conduct. Rodriguez escorted Angela toward the elevator, apologizing profusely for the incident and assuring her that the matter would be thoroughly investigated. Angela accepted the apology graciously, but made it clear that she expected the courthouse administration to take appropriate action to prevent similar incidents in the future. As Angela finally headed toward the congressional hearing room, she tried to compose herself and focus on her upcoming testimony. But the stress and humiliation of the past 30 minutes had taken a toll on her confidence and emotional state. She knew that she would have to draw on all of her professional training and experience to deliver an effective presentation after such a disturbing and disruptive encounter. Angela entered the congressional hearing room 30 minutes late, still shaken from her encounter with Officer Thompson. The committee members looked up with concern as she approached the witness table. Her usually perfect composure was slightly cracked, and careful observers could see the stress in her eyes despite her professional demeanor. Angela apologized for the delay and briefly explained that there had been a security issue at the courthouse entrance. Congressman William Hayes, the committee chairman, asked Angela if she was all right and whether she needed a few minutes to prepare before beginning her testimony.
Angela appreciated his consideration but declined the offer, knowing that the committee had a busy schedule and that her delayed arrival had already disrupted their timeline. She opened her briefcase carefully, double-checking that all her documents
were properly organized after the earlier chaos. As Angela began her presentation on Pentagon budget allocations, her voice was steady and professional. But those who knew her well could detect a slight tremor that had not been there in previous testimonies. She presented complex budget data and strategic analysis with her usual expertise, but the earlier confrontation had clearly affected her confidence. Several committee members noticed that she seemed more subdued than in past appearances. During her testimony, Angela addressed funding for overseas military operations and strategic partnerships that were crucial to national security. Her analysis was thorough and well-researched, demonstrating her deep understanding of complex defense issues. But she found herself occasionally distracted by thoughts of the humiliating scene at the courthouse entrance, where her professional credentials had been questioned in front of dozens of witnesses. Meanwhile, back at the security checkpoint, Maria Rodriguez was dealing with the aftermath of Thompson's actions. She had immediately contacted her superiors to report the incident and the security breach caused by exposing classified documents in a public area. Rodriguez also began gathering witness statements and reviewing security camera footage to document exactly what had occurred. Thompson remained at his post, but he was no longer allowed to interact with visitors. Rodriguez had assigned him to observe only while she handled all security checks personally. Thompson seemed confused and defensive, still not fully understanding the seriousness of his actions or the professional consequences he would soon face. He muttered complaints about being unfairly blamed for doing his job. The Pentagon Security Office received notification of the incident within an hour of its occurrence. Officials there were concerned not only about the exposure of classified materials but also about the treatment of one of their senior analysts. They began their own investigation to determine whether any sensitive information had been compromised and to assess the security implications of the courthouse incident. Videos of the confrontation continued to spread on social media throughout the day. People who watched the clips were outraged by Thompson's obvious bias and unprofessional behavior. Many commented about the broader issues of discrimination and the challenges faced by qualified professionals of color in government and other fields. The incident sparked conversations about implicit bias in security settings and law enforcement. Angela completed her congressional testimony and answered questions from committee members about various aspects of the defense budget. Despite the earlier disruption, she provided valuable insights that would help lawmakers make informed decisions about military spending. However, several representatives expressed concern about the delay and asked whether the security incident had affected her ability to present her analysis effectively. After the hearing concluded, Angela was approached by Congressman Hayes and several other committee members. They expressed their apologies for the treatment she had received and assured her that they would be contacting Courthouse administration to address the incident. Hayes specifically mentioned that such behavior was unacceptable and could not be tolerated in federal facilities. Rodriguez completed her preliminary investigation by the end of the day. Her report documented Thompson's violation of multiple security procedures and his inappropriate treatment of a high-ranking government official. She recommended immediate disciplinary action and additional training for all security personnel to prevent similar incidents. Rodriguez also noted that Thompson's actions had created unnecessary security risks rather than addressing them. Thompson was called into Rodriguez's office late that afternoon for a formal meeting about the incident. When confronted with witness statements and video evidence of his behavior, Thompson initially tried to defend his actions. He claimed that he was just being thorough and that anyone could fake government identification. But Rodriguez pointed out that proper procedure required him to verify credentials through official channels, rather than making judgments based on personal assumptions. The Courthouse administration moved quickly to address the situation. Thompson was immediately suspended pending a full investigation of his conduct. He would be required to undergo extensive bias training and sensitivity education before being considered for reinstatement. The administration also implemented new protocols for credential verification and staff training on recognizing various forms of government identification. Pentagon officials contacted Angela personally to apologize for the incident and to ensure that no classified information had been compromised. They conducted a thorough review of all documents that had been exposed and determined that while the security breach was serious, no critical secrets had been revealed to unauthorized persons. Angela was commended for her quick action in securing the scattered materials. The courthouse issued a formal apology to Angela and announced new measures to prevent similar incidents. These included enhanced training for all security personnel on proper identification procedures and respectful treatment of all visitors. The administration also established a complaint process for people who felt they had been treated unfairly by security staff. News media picked up the story within days, reporting on both the specific incident and the broader issues it represented. Angela declined most interview requests, preferring to let her professional work speak for itself. However, she did provide a brief statement emphasizing the importance of treating all government officials and citizens with dignity and respect, regardless of their appearance or background. The incident had lasting consequences for everyone involved. Thompson faced disciplinary action and was required to complete extensive retraining before returning to duty. He was also transferred to a different assignment where his interactions with the public would be limited and closely supervised. The incident became part of his permanent employment record. Angela continued her important work at the Pentagon, but the experience had reinforced her awareness of the challenges she faced as a professional woman of color in high-level government service. She used the incident as motivation to mentor other young professionals from diverse backgrounds, helping them navigate similar challenges in their own careers. The courthouse implemented lasting changes to its security procedures and training programs. The incident became a case study used in training sessions to help security personnel understand the importance of following proper procedures and treating all people with respect and professionalism. Most importantly, the incident sparked broader conversations about bias in security settings and the need for ongoing education and awareness. While Angela had hoped never to experience such treatment, she took some satisfaction in knowing that her dignified response to discrimination had led to positive changes that would benefit others in the future. Her professional reputation remained strong, and she continued to serve her country with distinction and honor.